Good morning, depending upon wherever you are joining from. Greetings, I, Purushendra Singh, on behalf of Cuts International, welcome everyone to our third virtual workshop of the series, Defense News Conclave, Stories of US-India Defense Partnership. The theme of today's workshop is Defense Modernization in India, Policy, Commands and Capabilities. Before we dive into the informative and fruitful discussion, just setting out some house announcements. Today's session will be 2 hours long. The panel discussion will be of 1 hour 20 minutes, after which we'll have a question and answer session to make the session even more interactive. One, we'll encourage the members of the panel to keep their cameras on during the session. Also, keep your microphones on mute unless you're speaking. Two, the session is being recorded and will be released later on the Cuts YouTube channel. Third, it is encouraged that the audience members post their questions indicating relevant speakers in the chat box directly to me to make this session more interactive. With this, I hand over the reins of this workshop to our moderator, Mr. Maruf Raza, media commentator on global military and security issues, who will now take on the reins and introduce the panel and take this workshop forward. To you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Puru. Welcome, everybody. Good morning in India and good evening in the US. I believe some people from the US have logged in. We have, thanks to Puru's efforts and his persistence, we have a very capable and informed audience. Most of them I have interacted with at some level or the other in my TV shows or otherwise on a personal level. So I'm aware of their very strong capabilities. We are going to look at defense modernization and restructuring also of our armed forces and the strategic partnerships that we would be looking at. Every speaker would get about 9 to 10 minutes, would request them to keep to that. It will be nicer if you don't read from a prepared script, but just go point-wise and leave room for other speakers to therefore give their bit so that we, and I'm pretty strict as a moderator, so I'll have to switch you off in case you go into this long prepared speech, which could be better served at some gathering of a school or a college where you get your 40-45 minutes. So we have with us Commodore Anil Jai Singh, maritime expert and rather active in various media platforms. We have Captain Anubha Rathore, who is nice to have a lady commentator with us and who will be able to give us some insights about the limitations that ladies and women face in this whole entire security narrative of India, which is very important to incorporate them. We have the distinguished Member of Parliament, Manvinder Singh Ji, who is an old friend, a family friend and a school friend. And obviously, I sometimes have the privilege of appearing alongside his articles with my 2 bits worth in some of the magazines that look at national security issues. And I always love to read his written word. We have Mr. Rishi Atreya and the distinguished Shri Amit Kaushish, who will bring very deep insight into financial planning of the Indian defense apparatus. So I think without further detail, let me get the ball moving. And I have suggested 3 broad areas, but you can always bring in the 4th and 5th, because as we know in the field of defense, there are a lot of interrelated areas. So you cannot operate in watertight compartments, though unfortunately, India's Ministry of Defense in South Block always operates in watertight compartments. And there is a problem there because very often the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, or the armed forces don't know what the research and development agencies are doing. And everyone is finger pointing to each other to say that, oh, we could have got there much earlier had somebody told us that this was the benchmark we should have worked on. So I think that is an area we'd like you to draw your experience and throw some light on. So can I I mean, keeping things in mind, can I take the opportunity to, who should I begin first with? Should I start with Amit ji or Anil ji? So I would rather start with Amit Kaushik sir. I'm giving your seniority the respect it deserves, and of course your experience, and lay out broadly what are the constraints within the Ministry of Defense and the Armed Forces structure of India in terms of inter-service cooperation, modernization, force restructuring. I mean, we know for a fact that finance is an issue which really defines how we respond to these challenges. So, sir, with no further delay, the ball's in your court.
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join the discussion. Let me begin by quoting Mark Twain, who once said that the shortage of funds or the paucity of funds is the root of all evil. And if I may add my 2 pennies worth to it, it is also the driving force behind all the, we wonder whether we can actually address this problem by tinkering with the system of budgeting and better planning and all that. This problem that you talked about basically arises from the mismatch between aspirations, between what we plan to do and the finances that are actually available to execute those plans. Now, this has been a perennial problem, and if I may say, this has been the bane of all the problems which beset our defense management. Rather than explaining what the problem is, because everybody knows what the problem is. We've been talking about the problems, but let me focus more on what we ought to be doing, what we should do, or what we can do to address this problem of paucity of funds. And to put it briefly, I think there are what is required to be done is can be at 2 planes. At the first level, which is the micro level and which is more immediately doable, I think we need to look at the structure of the defense budget. The focus today is entirely on to look at the defense budget in terms of or through the prism of allocation utilization, without much focus on the outcome of the budgetary allocation and utilization. So if we were to focus more on the outcome of budgetary allocations and utilization, it will serve the cause better. And for that to happen, we need to restructure the way the defense budget is organized at present. Now, it's not as if no effort has been made. In fact, in 2016 or thereabouts, there was some effort made to restructure the budget and to focus it more on result-oriented outcomes. But it didn't happen in the sense that the demand for grants was brought down from 8 to 4, and thereafter nothing was done. And a lot of time has been spent, or rather frittered away, in talking about pursuing, to my mind, fruitless, prescriptions like, the demand for raising the defense budget to 3% of the GDP, or creating a non-lapsable pool of funds, or separating defense budget from the rest of the defense budget. Now, all that is not going to happen for the simple reason that every single penny that is required for defense comes from the same source, namely the Consolidated Fund of India. And therefore, what is important, and to wrap up this part of the discussion, what is important is to focus on defense planning, which has to be financially viable, which has to be doable. And unless we focus on financially viable planning, we will not be able to address this problem of matching the aspirations with execution. And there is no denying that there has been a lot of problem with our defense planning. Primarily, there is no broader framework with reference to which defense planning could be done. We don't have a bespoke organization, 24/7 organization, which could deal with defense planning. Our defense plans are disjointed. These are not financially viable. So all these issues need to be addressed if we were to achieve the objectives that we have in mind. We can forget about the civil-military relations problems and the stick in the mud that the finance division is seen to be. All this can be done. All this can be overcome if we were to focus on, as I said, financially viable defense planning. So I'll stop here and then maybe expand on what I said later on if required.
Thank you, sir. Very well put across. Some very important points raised by you. I'm not going to go into a long monologue, but I just want to sort of throw 2-3 issues in the air. One is, we keep talking about the need for a 3% expenditure from the GDP on the defense infrastructure. This was something that was suggested by the parliamentary committee also in the 90s. The CIPRI report of last year says that India spends close to 7% of its GDP on defense. Now, where they've got those figures from, Amit sir, you may like to elaborate on it in the Q&A session. And the second thing is, I agree with you that defense planning in India is pretty disjointed. The problem is, I think each of the services want to guard their turf. And therefore, we have 3 doctrines of the 3 services, but we have no combined doctrine for the armed forces. So if that is not there, I would argue that the entire restructuring and positioning of our armed forces and the equipment and capabilities that we have, by now we should have had a combined doctrine from which will flow a lot of other things. There is a lot of chant for the CDS and the CDS to be, but the past one, who's no more, and successors will all have to address this issue of a doctrine, because unless that is agreed upon by the services, you can keep talking of theaterization and restructuring, but to what effect? That's a thought I want to leave behind. And finally, I don't want to go on and on, but I will come back to these 2 issues later. I think I would now go to Manvinder Singh ji, who will be able to give us his views, considering that he's been part of various political dispensations which have talked about it, and his late distinguished father was a visionary in these issues himself. So I'm sure, with respect to his memory, I'm sure he will draw some insights from what he would have learned and what we've missed out on learning. So Manvinder, to you now.
Thank you, sir. It's a great pleasure being part of this discussion, and especially following the wise words of Mr. Kaushik. Yes, I've been a member of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defence, and it was a valuable experience to learn how the MOD, functions, presents, and the service headquarters function and present their cases for allocations of funds, their perceptions on what is modernization, what is policy. The doctrine, as you said, yes, of course, it is important. Apparently there is a doctrine which has been produced by Headquarter Integrated Defence Staff, but I'm not sure if that is the officially declared doctrine as far as the MOD is concerned, or it is just an IDS doctrine. But nevertheless, I don't want to get into nitpicking on that. The fact that a doctrine must exist, a joint doctrine must exist, and service doctrines must exist, but they can only flow out of a national security strategy. And a national security strategy is not the sole responsibility of the Ministry of Defense. It has to be a comprehensive national document with inputs from, the Ministry of Statistics, the Department of Atomic Energy, from shipping to all kinds of departments contribute to national security in their own peculiar way, in their own, strategic ways, because each has a contribution to the growth of India as a country, and each has a certain vision. And their vision, whether it's 2 paragraphs or it's 20 pages, must contribute to a national security strategy. But the fact that this NSS document doesn't exist in India is because, as you said rightly when you initiated the discussion, the departments and the ministries and the services all live in silos, and sharing of knowledge, sharing of information between departments and services is pretty much non-existent. I'll just give a small example. Forget about all that is displayed on Republic Day parade as just fancy military hardware. If you look at the most essential weapon in the world, which is a rifle, a small arms rifle, the proliferation of types of small arms in this country, I think it would be a shame. There are far too many types of rifles which are available to different services. You just adding to logistic costs, and the most fundamental of budgeting comes from cheaper logistics. And Mr. Kaushish was referring to streamlining budgeting, but you begin from the smallest to go to the biggest, and that's why this whole reform thing about CDS and theaters and joint commands. I want that the country should head in that direction of jointmanship, but joint cannot come from the top. It has to come from the bottom up, from the combat formation up. And it's a simple technology that you can't make a pyramid from the top down. You have to make a pyramid from a strong base, and the base would obviously come from integrating at the combat level. And combat level integration will work best once the services start, planning together, and each one wants to, control its own domain. But my suggestion would be to at least have a joint logistics command, instead of going for the fancy strategic commands and air defense commands and the other stuff yet. Start with a logistics command where you streamline your logistics, you streamline your budgeting, and you get a sense of how you can save more to spend more. And I'm not particularly enamored by 2% of GDP or 3% of GDP. These are fixed goalposts, and security doesn't work on a fixed goalpost. Things change, scenarios change, threats change. What wasn't a threat earlier is very much a threat now. You thought Ladakh was going to be a peaceful, high altitude, fairly reasonable, cold, climate deployment zone, but now it's the most important, security threat to India. Where India is the most vulnerable today. So those scenarios change, and because scenarios change, I think you can't have a fixed, benchmark on it has to be 2% or 3% of GDP. I mean, there are various other things which will come up in the discussion, and I don't want to sort of lead on to that too much as yet. I'm sure other speakers will have their own inputs, and I'll leave it at that. And for the second round, open it up more for other inputs. Thank you.
Okay, great. You've thrown some very interesting ideas up in the air, and from no fixed goalpost for spending to the need for national security strategy. I was told, I read somewhere that was the responsibility of the NSA. And I think, I don't know, for too long, I think India's bureaucracy has also tried to keep everything delightfully vague. India's approach has been that if we don't go into too much of detail, ambiguity will be our best advantage. I don't know how far you can continue to push that card. We can discuss that later.
Yeah.
So I will now request Captain Anuba Rathore, being a lady, and sidestep my good friend Commodore Anil Jai Singh to the end, because I didn't want to let the lady be at the end, considering the kind of furor there is right now in the country about the role of women. So, madam, all yours.
Thank you so much. Presently, I'm having a fan moment, Mr. Raza sir. So, fangirl moment, in fact. I'd been listening to you since ages, and the analysis, which are very, very real and very, very accurate, which you've been doing on defense matters, I wish they were at least accepted, adapted on the ground as well. Anyways, here I am with all the eminent personalities who have a lot of experience, exposure. I may not stand with all of you, but then I'm really thankful for the organizers to invite me here. What at the moment I can narrate and talk about is that my experience during the Kargil war. I was posted somewhere in 26 DOU, which was very close to the LOC, and the responsibility which we were given as an ordnance unit was a huge one that time. And I would like to speak on 2 points. First, about the procurements and the inventory and the things which were available to us, and also about my experience as one of the initial courses officers, a lady officer being posted there. So my journey to 26 DOU began with the writing to the chief or writing to higher echelons that I need to be posted to, field areas. That time, this policy was not there. Actually, I don't know about other forces, but in ordnance, it was not there that a lady to be posted in forward areas. So, courtesy my husband being posted in the forward area, I requested for posting closer to him. So this is how it came. But then the thing was that the policy that time was that they do not post. Firstly, they were not posting any lady officers to the field areas. Secondly, they said that, we would like to consider it and give it a chance, but then a single lady officer cannot be posted in a forward unit. So they were looking for another lady officer to be posted along with me. And I can understand now the plight of the then CO, the commanding officer, when we have a limited strength of officer to be posted or to be posted in a field area. So he was really that, okay, I have only strength of 7 officers, and out of 7, 2 are lady officers. So he felt quite his, limitations, he said, that are increased. So that was the mindset that time of the officers. I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm just telling the truth of facts which I felt that time. Then came the unfortunate war, which was forced upon us, the Kargil war. And sadly, or you can say it was very, very, that time, a sentimental or an emotional time for the our unit where I was posted to receive the martyrs' bodies and hand them over to the parents or the closest relatives. So that time, as now I come on to my second point, that is the procurement and releasing the equipment, clothing to the our officers and men who were fighting there. So that time also, then since our limited resources, and you can say that the again the CEO was saying that, okay, we have to send somebody, one officer, to the other depot, bigger depot, to get the items released. Again, he found himself in a fix, saying that, okay, now we have lady officers, how do we do it? So we volunteered that there's nothing that we would not like to do, and definitely at present circumstances, definitely. So many a times I was sent, and the other lady officer was sent to Udhampur to get the things released. And during that time, we realized that you can say that how limited and our equipment, clothing, and other things and other items were. They were really, really very. There was a crunch of these essential items that time, and maybe because of the nuclear this thing we had done, we were having sanctions on us. So, and then that time we were not producing many things indigenously. So there was, we could feel that shortage of spares, a lot of spares for the armored units and ammunition, wheeled guns, bulletproof, and even the mosquito nets, which was really, really a very, that time we were unable to procure that, unable to supply that, unable to give them to the people who were fighting there, our military. So this is my initial, you can say, experience as close as I could be to a war, and which was very, very emotional on two fronts. Firstly, I could see my own fellow officers, my own postmates, giving up their lives, and also that in the want of certain very, very essential items, we were really running post to pillar to see that how we can procure it. So I think I just have this much to contribute at this moment. But when I listen to you people more, so probably I'll be able to, add on something more.
Well, thank you very much. I just, without getting into a debate at this stage, I just wanted to give two responses. One was that you talked of shortage of equipment and spares. There has been a tendency in India, and Mr. Amit Kaushish will educate us on that we tend to go in for purchases when it's a complete crisis situation. And there are two arguments to that. One is you can keep stockpiling and the stocks become outdated after a while. So do you really need to stockpile? And the other counter argument to that is that there is a minimum WWR by which the structures have to keep functional. So if you don't supply the necessary equipment, and we have had more recently some vice chiefs of services say so openly in public that, not more than 25 to 30% of the equipment that our armed forces have are relatively new, and more than 65% are old and vintage or even non-functional. So there is a problem, but I'm told this is a problem across the world. Even the American armed forces will always be complaining that they are short of the warfighting equipment they want, and they are ill-equipped, notwithstanding the fact that America spends on defense more than the whole world put together in terms of overall defense allocations. The second issue was about the role of women. I have been visiting forward areas, and there are logistics issues that commanding officers have expressed with regard to a single lady officer being there. They are highly competent, highly motivated. In recent years, some have even won the Sword of Honor at OTA. But the issue is that, the further you go up in the field area structures, the more the logistic challenges increases, especially with a single lady officer being there. And our society is not still anywhere near the Americans or the Europeans, where women just merge into a group of men as though there's nothing unusual about being there. So those are issues I think we will have to, and that's why there have been remarks from time to time that we need to do it in phases. And it's not to deny women opportunities. The problem is, how do you address the crisis situation that might emerge with a single woman in a group of men and might lodge a complaint or two? And that's what commanding officers have told me, which you don't know how to address then, who was monitoring the situation then. So now I go to somebody who is extremely informed and wise, Commodore Anil Jai Singh, and notwithstanding the fact that he is a maritime expert, but I think I'd like him to throw some light on some of the arrangements that India is now going in for with the Americans, particularly in respect of the maritime challenges that we are expected to face. How well equipped are we for that? How much is there a sensitivity to maritime issues in the Ministry of Defense and in Delhi? Since historically, we as a country have looked at threats from the north and not so much as challenges in the south and southern parts of India along the waters. So Commodore Jai Singh would request your views on that, and of course, anything else that you feel that's worthy of discussion. Thank you. Mute, unmute, unmute.
Unmuted now. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maruf. Thank you for this kind introduction. And thank you, Guts, for inviting me to participate in this discussion this morning with and being part of such an eminent panel. Mr. Kaushish's sagacity has always been something I've admired and greatly respected. He is one of the foremost voices to put forth most honestly and with great maturity the views of the armed forces on matters of defense finance. Mr. Manvendra Singh, of course, I have been a fairly frequent contributor to Defense and Security Alert, so I read his editorials with great interest. Maruf, there's nothing really I have to say about the depth of your knowledge. And Captain Rathore, I'd just like to highlight to you that things have changed a lot from your time in the Army. I commanded an underway replenishment ship, and we were one of the few ships which embarked lady officers because we had suitable accommodation on board. You would know that the Chief of Naval Staff has recently announced that all the current surface combatants are being reconfigured with suitable accommodation for not only lady officers, but we're also now going to be enrolling lady sailors into the Navy. So I think that's a very positive step. It was an inevitability, and I'm glad that we again has been at the fore in introducing this. Coming to the topic of our discussion, firstly, of course, I'll just briefly touch upon the Joint Theatre Commands because that was the topic given to me, and then I'll come to what Maruf wanted me to speak about, mainly on the maritime engagement with the United States of America, which has been considerable in the last few years. I will not go into the historical perspective of how and where the CDS originated or the Theatre Command concept originated, but I will just highlight 4 issues very briefly. Firstly, that there is no denying the fact that warfare in the 21st century requires an appropriate sort of national security architecture that needs to be aligned to the multi-dimensional kinetic as well as non-kinetic challenges that we are facing in our national security. And theaterization is definitely being described. It's been described as the most significant military reform in India since independence. And of course, meant to create a flexible and agile and most importantly, synergized national security capability optimized for the demands of contemporary and future warfare. Traditional paradigms of warfare from the land, sea, and air are rapidly changing. The cyber domain, outer space, and modern disruptive technologies are becoming effective force multipliers, not only within the battle space or theater of conflict, but much beyond. It is therefore imperative, I think, that the Indian security establishment, and not just the armed forces, adapts to these changes rapidly. Armed forces are often accused of preparing for the last war instead of looking ahead, despite the fact that most transformation technologies, including the ubiquitous internet, have first been developed for military applications. But let me also add that this is not an entirely untrue belief, because as I always say, militaries tend to be conservative in adapting to change, because war is not something that one can trifle with. And also, despite this proliferation we are seeing of autonomous and disruptive technologies, it is not without reason that countries are continuing to invest heavily in traditional military hardware, which are aligned with their national security imperatives. The recent European response to the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict is a live example. Germany has allocated 100 billion euros to enhance its military capability and capacity. India is also committed to theaterization. This was reiterated recently by the defense minister, I think just a couple of days ago, at a speech he gave in UP. Most large militaries also follow a theater command organization. But there are reasons for it. And I think India has to be very careful that we don't end up aping a model, but create our own model. And what I've observed is that while all these countries, like let's say the US, Russia, China, which have adapted to theater commands, all looked at a future expeditionary capability of being able to deploy considerable military power well beyond their shores. I don't know if India is looking at that in the next decade or so. Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. But just to look at a theater command organization because it seems to be the right thing to do may not be quite the right rationale at this point of time. It has to be in sync with national strategy, with the national security strategy. It has to be debated and discussed in detail. Organizational structures have to be put in place before effecting the change. Whether in terms of human resource, fiscal resource, or operational resources, have to be very carefully calibrated. And most importantly, it has to include restructuring the entire ecosystem of military preparedness, including the civilian structures that exist in the administration. In the USA, we're all aware of the Goldwater-Nichols Act, and even China, an opaque organization like China's, restructured the all-powerful Central Military Commission when it transformed its armed forces into a theater command structure. In India, so far, we have not seen much of this happening. We've been talking of operational theater commands, but we have not, or at least there's not much in the open domain of how we are going to handle training and logistics. Logistics came in for mention, joint logistics. There's one aspect of just logistic management, and the other is the important aspect of operational logistic management. India is actually, in India, even single service inventory management is a huge challenge. And I personally believe, and with due apologies to Mr. Kaushik, part of the blame for this lies at the doors of the Ministry of Defense. Because we source a variety of equipment from all parts of the world, and an overall lack of standardization exists. You know, the MOD is manned by civilian bureaucrats, and the middle and senior echelons of which are drawn from all departments and ministries of the government, including there are people from the tourism ministry, there are people from the railways, and many of them lacking even the most rudimentary knowledge of defense matters. So what is the safest way to procure equipment? Resort to competitive bidding, find the L1 and give him the order. Without going into the technological weightage of carrying out such an assessment. Now this has led to multiple inventory supply chains, training and cross-training of personnel for similar equipment which has been procured from different sources at different times. Just to give an example, I won't mention equipment, there's a particular equipment which was introduced in the Navy a few years ago. In the last 5 years, almost 50 units of that equipment have been ordered from 4 different OEMs. Now that's going to be a huge logistic challenge, whether it's in terms of spare management, whether in terms of training, whether in terms of maintenance and operations. So these are the things we need to understand, need to be addressed. Coming to my last point, any restructuring of the country's military cannot happen without restructuring the country's Ministry of Defense, particularly in a democratic structure where the Ministry of Defense is the overarching administrator of the armed forces. Except for the creation of a DMA, the Department of Military Affairs, with limited authority and financial powers, there has been no visible restructuring within the Ministry of Defense or any attempt so far to integrate the service headquarters with the MOD, which are still considered even today as attached offices to the MOD. Hence, effectively what happens is that the service headquarters, therefore, are not a part of the decision-making loop in the MOD for decisions that are affecting their own forces on the front line. And the irony also is that while, as I mentioned, Civilians from all and sundry departments are appointed in decision-making roles in the MOD with or without any previous experience. No service officer figures in it, except for a few we have in a technical advisory role as part of the cosmetic restructuring of the MOD. So that, I think, is something we really need to look at very carefully. Are we really going into a theatre command organization? Are we looking at the entire picture? Are we thinking it through till the very end? And coming to my fourth and final point, after which I'll come to the other aspect. A security construct is always based on a strategy. This has been alluded to earlier. We do not have a national security strategy in place. We do not have a joint warfighting strategy in place. We have some informal document that the IDS promulgated. Single service, each service has its own doctrine and strategy. So if we don't have a joint warfighting strategy, if we don't have a national security strategy or not in place, on what basis are we restructuring our military? On what basis are we restructuring, carrying out the largest military restructuring since independence? We have not had a single white paper. I cannot remember when the last, if we have ever had a defense white paper. I cannot remember when was the last time national security or restructuring of the Indian armed forces was discussed and debated in Parliament. And, you know, in the absence of these kind of mechanisms, then you find terms like two-front war, cold start doctrine. These are being bandied about by all and everybody. So I think we need to really sit down and take stock. And as General Naravne had said, it is something that will happen, but it has to be deliberately thought through. It will take time. It has to be understood in all its dimensions. And only then should we venture forth. India is not a country that can afford to get lax on its borders. We have a threat on all our borders, on our land borders. Our maritime borders are soon going to be challenged. We cannot afford to take these things lightly. We have to understand it. And finally, I won't take time on this, but operational decision making, I think, in a joint theatre command concept is another issue that merits a lot of discussion. Perhaps we can discuss it as we move along. Coming, Maruf, to the Indo-US engagement, you know, it started with Malabar in '92. India was very inward looking, but I think it has made tremendous strides. And I think the defining moments were the signing of the 4 foundational agreements on logistics, communication, and the other 2. These, I think, really set the framework for a deeper engagement with the US Navy. Look, let's face it, in the Indo-Pacific, which is now the largest strategic construct that we're looking at, despite the US having reconfigured or renamed its US Pacific Command as the US Indo-Pacific Command, the geographical limits of that command in the Indian Ocean have not changed. It still ends at the west coast of India. Therefore, a large part of the Indian Ocean, or rather the Indo of the Indo-Pacific, is pretty much India's baby. Even in a structure like the Quad, which I think has a lot of potential for the future, seeing how they're going about it. 3 of the 4 Quad members are resident Pacific powers. Only India is the Indian Ocean country in that. So largely in the Indo-Pacific, what we are seeing is it is India which really is figuring in Indo-Pacific and not the Indian Ocean region as a whole. Therefore, security of the Indian Ocean region is going to be India's baby. And this is where I will, perhaps in the discussion, we come to this concept of a maritime theatre command. Therefore, if we have to counter a rising and advancing China is looking to expand its footprint in the Indian Ocean. It needs to. With its unfavorable maritime geography, it cannot aspire to global maritime dominance as a precursor to its intention to become the next superpower until it establishes its dominance in a larger sea space. And the Indian Ocean provided that sea space and the gateway to the Atlantic. It has been articulated in its Atlantic strategy as well. Therefore, China the PLA Navy is expanding at a breathtaking pace. 20 to 25 blue water platforms are being commissioned every year. In 3 years, they were able to, from launch to commissioning of an aircraft carrier took just 3 years. We've taken much longer. So we've got to factor that in. The Chinese Navy is already the largest Navy in the world. But at the moment, it does not have the wherewithal to challenge the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. 10 years down the line, the picture is going to be pretty different. China has gone into theatre commands. They are sort of replicating the American model. They're understanding the working of theatre commands. And as and when they feel that their military capability permits them to go expeditionary, they will. I will not be surprised if within the next decade, we have an Indian Ocean command, a Chinese Indian Ocean theatre command, maybe based in Djibouti. because ultimate aim being to get into the Atlantic. So the Indian Navy has to look very carefully at its own capability and capacity enhancement, and working very closely with all its partners in the Indo-Pacific to ensure that the Indian Ocean remains secure. One of the ways of doing it is to ensure that the threat to the Indian Ocean is mitigated by events east of the Malacca Straits in the South China Sea. That means, in a way, you prevent China from being able to bring that kind of force to bear on the Indian Ocean and bring India under pressure. China is doing things in a very systematic manner. It is building bases and it's building a submarine base in Bangladesh. It has given submarines to Bangladesh. It is giving submarines to Pakistan. All this is not because it expects these countries to fight India. It is all because they're looking for places to bring their submarines and their ships and find basing and support facilities so that they can have a permanent presence in Indian Ocean. We have to be careful of that. One of the encouraging things, and I think the Deputy Chief of Naval Staff, if I'm not mistaken, is presently in Bahrain, or was there till yesterday, meeting with the CMF, the Combined Maritime Forces, which is basically a combination of the different CTFs, 150, 151, 153, etc., and Atalanta, which was all created during the time of the piracy menace in Somalia. India has agreed to become an associate member of the CMF, which means that, broadly means that the Indian Navy will support the CMF, not as a part of CMF, but as if it is already operating in that region, it will support various CMF initiatives that may be in the region. This suits India as well because India is now called the preferred security partner in the Indian Ocean. And therefore, it is important for us to develop our capacities and capabilities in such a way that when this great power rivalry between the incumbent superpower, the US, and the challenger, China, is played out in the waters of the Indian Ocean, India should have the comprehensive national power as well as the maritime power to be able to influence the outcome of this great power rivalry rather than allow itself to be influenced by it. Thank you. That's all I had to say.
Okay.
And I look forward to the discussion there.
I think very impressive discourse and very impressive account by you on a number of issues. I, by and large, don't disagree with almost all your points. I think what I'd like to, and you've taken 15 minutes, but I didn't want to stop the flow of things because it had so much meat in it. I just want to add a few other sort of footnotes to the points that you've made, so that I think we can take the discussion in that direction. Firstly, India, China, US, Quad, etc., etc. I think, I'm coming around to the view that yes, China has expansionist tendencies, but China's actually doing what the West and European powers did for 2 centuries. So, and China sees that this is my century and there's nothing wrong if I have an aggressive agenda. Catch me if you can. That seems to be the Chinese attitude. The second thing is that as far as Quad is concerned, yes, Quad has a very expectedly a maritime component to it. But I have a problem with Quad because I find none of the Quad nations have in any joint statement spelt out that they've come together to counter China's expansion. We are hearing all sorts of fluff about Quad being a vaccine center for the world, as though aircraft carriers would be carrying vaccines and delivering them from one part of the world to the other. So I think it's an ostrich-like attitude, which the best thing is, as we learned back in school, that the best form of defense is to be in offense. So that's how, you just put all your players in the second half of the football field, then the enemy or the adversary will still knock a few goals in. So you've got to be on the offense. And I don't think, except for the United States, which is still being cautious, because I've come around to the view that the US is now the most prominent peripheral power in Asia. Asia, landlocked, is now Eurasia. On one side, Russia extending its tentacles to East Europe, And on the other side, China dominating largely the Asian landmass. We are not talking of island states like Japan or even those in Southeast Asia. The third point is that I've myself written about civil-military relations long back. And in 93, 94, my book on civil-military relations in India and Pakistan, I had spelled out what a theater command could be like. But this got momentum more recently because suddenly there was a desire to sit with a checklist of the Kargil Review Committee and fulfill all their recommendations and the Naresh Chandra Committee recommendations as far as strategic restructuring goes. General Shekitkar's recommendations are more about internal reforms in the army. So, this CDS issue has come up and has been sidelined again and again because the bureaucracy, while we blame them, we must understand the military has its own turf problems. And the bureaucracy is only happy to let the military fight with itself and say, Pehle, you sort your house out, then we will come in and give our 2 bits worth. I completely agree about the Ministry of Defense, and this is a legacy of Krishna Menon. The Government of India's Rules of Business of 1961, which came after the Thimaiya-Nehru standoff, very clearly spells out the military higher commanders to be outside the loop on a number of issues, as some of us know and some don't, that the service chiefs are not responsible for the defense of India. The civilian bureaucracy and the civilian minister is responsible for the defense of India. So therefore, and Admiral Arun Prakash has often written about and alluded to this aspect. So I think we need to, as you rightly said, we need to completely restructure the Ministry of Defense. And I don't think that's going to happen because the politicians and more so the bureaucracy sees the military as just an extended department of the Ministry of Defense. As far as they're concerned, they're a firefighting outfit, and they are not anything more serious in their calculation than the BSF, CRPF, and what have you. It's just a department, as far as they're concerned. And the point to understand is that whether you go in for theaterization or not, you need some kind of restructuring, call it by any other name. You need to restructure because we are now becoming like any of the paramilitary organization that as long as you give people a car, a flag, a light, and a staff car, and a Flagstaff house, you think you have achieved your purpose. I think it's bizarre that we have 17 commands where it can be reduced to 4 or 5 commands. Whether you call it a strategic forces command or not, there is an issue that the air chiefs, successive air chiefs, I'm not talking just the current air chief, they bring out again and again that what is the need for the Air Force being roped into theaterization. People keep saying, let's debate it. I mean, damn it, we've been debating it for more than 20 years since Kargil. Actually, we've been debating it since independence. But the fact of the matter is that one, Nehru clipped the wings of the services and brought them down to a certain structure, which was a different structure from the colonial days. Then Kargil required a review, and Kargil Review Committee suggested the need for theaterization simply because we would be able to cut costs. I mean, we can talk about having China and Pakistan, but we have, I personally believe now, national security requires a full pyramid at the top of which should be the National Security Advisor and not the Raksha Mantri. Pardon my saying so. I'm saying things which is going to upset people in the hierarchy. But you have to have an informed person who is basically coordinating everything. The BSF is doing most of the army's duties on the border, or the army is doing things that the BSF should be doing. So why are you having so much of overlap? Then we say we have a manpower issue because we need to pay for so much of manpower because we have huge borders that are defended. People talk of a 1.3 million armed forces or 1.2 million armed forces. Actually, it's 4 million. because you have the BSF, you have the CRPF, you have ITPP, you have SSB, and all these structures, with the exception of the armed forces, are led by people who have never served in those organizations before. So they've come in as Commissioner of Police, Calcutta, and become head of ITPP and across the board. So there are issues about restructuring, and therefore I go back to Mr. Kaushish, sir, to answer this question about, has there been any thinking in pruning down the expenses on manpower, which will give you the room for maneuver for more capital expenditure? Because capital expenditure, as far as I know, is now down to less than 20% of the overall budget. How? And the second question is that suddenly the government decides that it's going to go for a $5.4 billion deal like the S-400. If your defense budgeting doesn't have room for it, where do you get the money from? You said you get it from the same basket. So at what cost and at what stage? Or is the Prime Minister's diktat good enough for the finance minister to say, okay, here is your money, go and buy it?
Well, first of all, you asked me two questions. One is about the effort made by MOD or any thinking in the MOD to reduce the manpower. Unfortunately, I am not the right person to answer the question because I don't know what's happening in the ministry. But I can only say that all the efforts that were made in the past, and there were efforts made in the past, because even before the Kargil happened, the then Chief of Army Staff had actually, if I remember correctly, said that we'll reduce the manpower by 50,000 and so on. The problem, however, has been that it's a noble intention, but to my mind, there was never a roadmap as to how that's going to happen. Whether that is feasible in the first place, and if it is feasible, how that is going to be done. The half-hearted attempts which were made and half-hearted suggestions which were made, for example, by saying that you should outsource more and more work. Well, you may outsource the work and reduce the formal manpower, but nobody ever did the costing as to whether the outsourcing of the work that everybody thought could be outsourced is going to cost you less money or more money. So there's not been any, to my knowledge, any seriously thought out effort to reduce the manpower. And I suspect that it's also very, very difficult to do that and to also simultaneously save enough money which could be utilized for capital acquisition over a longer period of time. Even if you were to reduce the manpower, it will take a very long time. And by the time you actually start reaping the benefit of that reduction, the prices of commodities will go up, and therefore it will offset whatever gain you make by reducing the manpower. Sorry, what was the other question? I've forgotten.
No, the other question was related to how do you suddenly provide the money to the armed forces when a decision has been taken by CCS or whatever, that, okay, we are going to go in for this equipment. I'm told very often the whole argument is, and the corporate sector is also familiar with it, oh, we haven't budgeted for this, so can we shift it to the next financial year? Somewhere down the line, the money has to be provided. And the budget, as it stands, leaves very little room for any adventurism in terms of purchases.
Yeah, so in fact, in the earlier remarks that I made, I did talk about budgeting, and my entire focus was on the problem, the budgeting. But having said that, when a new deal is signed, it's not as if the entire money is required in the year in which the deal is signed. The payments are staggered over a longer period of time, and during that period, a lot of previous liabilities are extinguished. And therefore, it is possible to accommodate new acquisitions. The problem, however, is that if we were to sign all the contracts for everything that we need to buy or we want to buy, there'll be a crisis because there is no system of management of committed liabilities. And We just keep on managing year to year. If some more extra money is required, if we can't shift it to the next year, then at the revised estimate stage, we seek more money, and at times we do get more money. At times we are not able to spend the money. So it's not a very smart way of managing the budget, but nevertheless, this is how it is. It's being managed at present because, as I said, the entire money is not required in the year in which the contract is signed. So you are able to stagger that payment. You are able to. There are slippages in deliveries, which also give you some elbow room to manage with the inadequate funds that you have. But I also take this opportunity to answer two questions. One which you asked, and another which a point which was raised by Commodore Anil Singh, and also I think Captain Anubha Rathore. You had asked me about the CIPRI figures of India's defense budget. Well, I think the answer lies in the fact that the methodology that they follow for aggregating the defense budget of various countries is very different from the methodology that we follow. I mean, for them, for example, if I remember correctly, all expenditure which is incurred on what we call paramilitary forces or on activities which are akin to military activities, that forms a part of the defense budget. Similarly, all expenditure on nuclear programs that is included in the defense budget. So obviously their figures are higher. I don't know if their figure is 7% for India, but it is certainly, I think, much more than the figure that we quote in our local discourse. The other point I want to make is about acquisitions. Now, it's a very sore point. I'll not go into the question of integration of the service headquarters with the Ministry of Defense because actually we have been in love with this idea, but I mean, please pardon me if it sounds harsh, but I have not really come across much literature on the modality of this integration. We do talk about the fact that the services headquarters are not integrated with the Ministry of Defense, that the services headquarters are an attached office of the Ministry of Defense, which incidentally, in my personal opinion, is not such a bad thing. And also the fact that the Defense Secretary is responsible for defense and security of India and all that, which is all true. But what is to be done and how it is to be done is something that, at least so far as my limited reading and exposure to this subject is concerned, I haven't found much thought being given to this. But talking of acquisitions, now look, we have to segregate revenue acquisitions, which I think Captain Anubha Rathore was talking about, from capital expenditure. Now, if you look at revenue expenditure or revenue procurements, over the years, in the last, say, starting 2001 or 2002, in the last 20 years, there's been tremendous amount of delegation of powers to the services for acquisition of revenue items. But if that has not worked, there are various reasons for it. The broad reasons are, for example, paucity of funds. Another reason is the procedural sort of complexity of revenue procurement, and lastly, the IFA system. Because I'm actually quite surprised to see that nobody mentioned about the financial advice system, which is a bane of all acquisitions. Now, so far as allocation of funds is concerned, I don't know what can be done to give more funds. But there is also a problem of utilization of funds. I think Captain Rathore talked about acquisitions in the Northern Command area. I remember in around 2001, immediately after Kargil, I was looking after CDA Northern Command in Jammu. And, there, I just gone there after NDC, so a lot of friends who were posted there in the command. And from the interaction that I had with them, I found that, there was actually everybody was struggling to spend the money that was available under the Army Commander's special financial powers. So it was blame it on the procedures, blame it on the IFA system or whatever. But the fact remains that the delegated powers, it's a problem area which must be addressed. Procedurally, incidentally, now it is the Department of Military Affairs which is responsible, or which has been allocated the task of revising the revenue procurement procedure, that is the Defense Procurement Manual 2009. But for the last 13 years, we were not able to do it. DTMA started this work, but was not able to do it. So I don't know what is the problem there. Insofar as the IFA system is concerned, I think there's some lack of appreciation as to what this system is all about. The integrated financial advice system is the IFAs are only advisors. They don't hold any veto powers. Actually, procedurally and as per the rules, the competent financial authorities have the authority to overrule the advice of the financial advisor and go ahead and procure this whatever is to be procured. So if the system is not working, there has to be thought given to why it is not working, whether it should be dispensed with, and whatever is to be done. But it's not just enough to say that there is a problem. We know the problem, but the solutions have to be discussed. On the capital side, I think again, the decision making since 2001, when the capital acquisition structure was created after the Kargil war, based on the recommendations of the group of ministers, it's a collective decision making. I mean, the services are. I would go to the extent of saying that the entire process is services driven, starting from identification of the equipment to be bought, formulation of the services qualitative requirement, formulation of the statement of case, pioneering the case for acceptance of necessity, field trials, staff evaluation, you name it. I mean, most of the process is driven by the services, and therefore to say that decision is made or decisions are taken in isolation by somebody else is, to my mind, not quite correct. If there is a problem, and there are problems, these need to be addressed. We need to give thought to, in such webinars, seminars, discussions, and whatnot. We need to give a thought to what has gone wrong and what ought to be done, what can be done, what needs to be done. If we focus on that, I'm sure we'll be able to produce better results. Well, I think I'll stop there. If there is any follow-up question, I'll be happy to take it.
You made some very strong points, sir. My small rebuttal to those 2-3 points is, one is that you see I am also a bit familiar with the defense acquisition process. And I think the problem is, like you can say they are services driven from RFP right down to NCNC trials. The problem is the final acquisition after the shortlist has been made by the services and given to the Defense Secretary's office and the Raksha Mantri's office. Thereafter, the financial issues the services are really kept out of the loop. That's one. The second thing just a second, sir. By and large, when negotiations take place with foreign countries and foreign OEMs, it is largely based, at least that's what has led to several scandals about to what extent the services were involved and to what extent the political dispensation took a direct decision to bring in a certain equipment, bypassing some terms that were put into place. I am not going to get into those controversies. All I'm just saying that the fear of taking a wrong financial decision, which will then lead to controversies, also cause endless delays. So the financial aspect that you brought out, the financial advisor's role, etc., is very important. But how can the whole system be streamlined in a way that people are resisting the final yes on a system, fearing that it might haunt them after their retirement? Your views, sir.
Yeah, see, the penultimate stage in the capital acquisition procedure is the contract negotiation.
Yes.
Now, every CNC, where the powers are delegated to the services, say up to 300 crores, if I'm not mistaken.
400 now.
Or maybe 400. The CNC is actually headed by a service officer, right? And it is not as if the finance member in the CNC has some kind of an overriding veto power. It's not the case. Even where the powers are not delegated and the CNCs take place in the ministry, even if these are headed by the joint secretary and acquisition manager, one of the most important members of that committee is now who are called the additional DG technical. And therefore, the entire sort of support to the CNC is given by the service headquarters. So it is not as if they are kept out of the loop or they are not a part of the decision making. The problem that you are talked about is primarily, in my opinion, and I may be wrong, I concede that, but this is my experience. The problem is because of the initial initial sort of deficiencies in conceiving a project, whether it is in terms of the SQR formulation, whether it is in terms of the choice of the vendors, etc., etc. We can discuss this, but we don't have the time. So it is not as if the cases fall through because of the role the finance plays or doesn't play. To give you an idea of, I think Mr. Manavendra Singh will remember this. If I remember correctly, he was still a member of the standing committee that time. In 2012, when it is on record, it is there in the standing committee report that over a period of about 18 months, 41 RFPs of the Indian Army fell through because of the SQR related issues. So which SQR formulation, as you know, the civilians or the finance division plays absolutely no role in that.
I know.
Actually approved by the Services Equipment Policy Committee. So while I don't deny that there is a reluctance to take decisions which could be questioned later on, and I don't know what can be done about it because there are any number of cases. I would like the CBI to come knocking on my door 5 years after I've retired. So if you can blame me for being so skeptical, I'll accept that. But the point is that we need to do something, and what is it that should be done is something which is beyond me to answer.
Yes, sir. You've. I won't go on and debate this endlessly with you because you have given us some great insights, and thank you very much. And my only thing is, I learned from several discussions and seminars on acquisition process. One of the things that was that we don't have a full department or detachment or a core or a service within the services where people are actually trained for the acquisition process. And what happens is normally a very bright officer comes in for a 2-year, 2.5-year tenure in the service headquarters. And he's told, okay, now you look after this. This is a very sensitive area. By the time he gets to grips with it, it's time for him to move on promotion and go somewhere else. So there is no, repository of information that is passed on by team members to team members. He goes with his knowledge, he leaves a few notes behind. And therefore, we have a system like in the NDU in Washington, they have a course on defense acquisitions. We should send officers there. We should have a full-fledged cadre instead of, having so many other corps and departments within our armed forces who do little else than just total pura karna. I don't want to get into the names of those organizations, but whether there are courses that people are doing on vehicle management and then end up in a unit with mules in it, or there are people who end up doing courses on some aspect because the training establishment has to run because the general officer is there and he has to run courses. We need to get onto something which has been a bugbear for us for a long time. But I think the discussion is only about acquisitions, but I'd like Manavendra Singh ji now to give his insights into what he has seen in the parliamentary committees about A, the acquisition process, and B, how can we spend our money better if, going back to your point, sir, that 2% or 3% should not be the yardstick for us to take a decision. But we should take a decision based on what we need when the situation arises. Classically speaking, China's intrusions in Ladakh had suddenly got a number of re-evaluation of threat perception, force deployment, equipment acquisition, and our strategy to deal with China, which until then had come to be that we are very glad that it's a bulletless border, and so it shall be forever, ill-defined though it was, but it'll remain a bulletless border. Now, that's all been thrown up into the snows or in the winds. So your views on where do we go from here?
Okay, since Mr. Kaushal reminded me of that period, and since I followed this process, this ministry well before that and well after that, I'll be very brutal with all of you well-informed members. When it comes to acquisitions and financial management, the only service which has got a fix on it is the Air Force, to a large extent. I'm not saying they got it perfect, but they are the only ones who got a fix on how to spend money and how to get the money. The other two services, unfortunately, don't have the knowledge. And more than the Army, I think the biggest loser is the Navy, because it's too far away from Delhi, unfortunately. And we are what you call for hide-born people. We are a land-born people. We've forgotten our maritime history from the Cholas and the Pandyas and the great maritime heritage that we had for centuries, and we lost it. But that's another matter for some other discussion, hopefully some other time. The sad truth and the brutal truth is that, yes, the parliament doesn't know about the armed forces. The parliament doesn't know how the armed forces function. Yes, the bureaucracy doesn't know how the armed forces function. But equally truthful is the fact that the armed forces don't know how the parliament functions and how the bureaucracy functions. Nobody knows the armed forces better. I mean, even better than the armed forces know themselves. Nobody knows armed forces better than one section of the bureaucracy called the Defense Account Service. From the time that gentleman or the lady joins service as a 20-something-year-old till the time they retire, they have an insight into the thinking, into the innards, the DNA, the toenails of the armed forces, and they know how the armed forces function, think, plan, or not plan at all. And I think, a lot of the points about IFA, are misplaced. I agree with Mr. Kaushal that, the IFA, lack of knowledge about IFAs has been overblown. I am not in favor. I'm not somebody who's in favor of the user deciding the acquisition completely. I think there is, it's not, we're not Americans, or we're not some other country where a system is designed for that country because of their own peculiar, political, social cultures. We are India, and what we have is based on certain Indian traditions, and these traditions are not, British made. There are certain traditions in the armed forces and the functioning of the armed forces that predate the British and the Mughals, and we've inherited those traditions. Some of them should be retained. A lot of them should not be retained. But I think the financial functioning has a certain benefit. It keeps the soldier away from the dirty business of touching soiled notes. If you know what I mean, the oiled, soiled notes. The soldier should be kept away from that. I sincerely believe in that, that separation. I think, the armed forces headquarters tend to change or shift goalposts when it comes to acquisitions. Somebody who would come as, DGOS decides that, the director infantry's or DG infantry's recommendation for that particular thing is not good. Or, some other PSO in the Army headquarters decided that, this light tank is better than that tank. And these things go around, these files get created, and they gather a momentum of their own until they come to a point where the dirt is just too heavy to carry that file anymore, and they lie dormant until somebody decides that, yes, Ladakh is a crisis and we need a light tank. So the light tank file is dusted and taken out, and then the whole process starts again. If you look at it, I'll give you another story. My first exposure in J&K deployment in 95, 96, the IB and the military intelligence estimates of the number of active militants was about 3,200. That was the number of active militants, domestic and Pakistani put together. And that time, you just check the number of RR units who were doing the best job possible, outstanding job. It was basically Victor Force and Kilo Force. Today, 2022, when the IB and the military intelligence estimates for the number of active militants is between 270 and 280. We have X into 10 into whatever number of RR units in the same geographical area with 1/10 the number of militants in that area, or functioning in that area. I mean, you start internally in terms of what kind of manpower do you need. I'm just giving you a live example of an operational area where there are so many logistics matters, so many manpower matters that could be addressed by just analyzing what is your purpose, what is your role there, and then you gradually come to the larger picture of threat perceptions, and ultimately what is the role for the armed forces? Are they basically part of the armed forces? I really think part of the armed forces exist only for a fancy Republic Day parade on 26 January in Delhi. Otherwise, it makes no sense having the kind of stuff that you are displaying and procuring when your priority should be 10 other things. The crisis in the submarine fleet is a scandal of the highest order. The negligence of the preparing for the third aircraft carrier or not preparing for it is going to come back to India as a tsunami, unfortunately. There are other things like that, but the fact these things don't focus, they don't come into the focus because they're so remote, and they don't really gather they're not good for eyeballs because they don't produce the eyeballs. And what does is a fancy parade, and but security is far more important than a fancy parade. And last point, I would not want to club the what you call the paramilitary forces along with the armed forces, because their service regulations, their rules and conduct, or whatever the acts they come under, are so different from the armed forces acts that I don't think we should even be comparing these two aspects of service. I do think that armed forces and internal security continued, or the frequent use should be a cause of concern for the country as a whole. And that's why I go back to the point about the national security strategy. What is it that you want to do in this country with the resources available today, 20 years down the line, and 50 years down the line? And what are the threats that you're facing today, 20 years down the line, and 50 years down the line? Come to that sort of kind of a paper, and then thrash out your structures, both internal and larger bureaucratic structures. I'll wait for the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
So great points made. My brief responses to 2-3 of them would be that you're absolutely right that both the military and the civilian, including the politician, are all unaware. As I mentioned at the start of the conference, we are all working in...
One second. I'll tell you about the politicians very brutally. 99% of the politicians will not be able to read what's on the shoulder.
Yeah.
They will tell you the constable ranks. They'll tell you the police ranks, but they won't be able to tell you the armed forces ranks.
Very true. Very true. I think, we have a history of that, and the history goes back to Pandit Nehru's decision to keep the military out of public discourse, and that led to a certain amount of disinterest. In Pakistan, the disinterest was higher, so it led to the military becoming a key decision maker in defense acquisitions and then in running the country. So that was one of the reasons that the military decided, okay, you don't understand us, we'll understand what we have to do, so we'll get into it. But there's a whole story to it. The second aspect is about what I had said, and I did mention earlier that we're all operating in watertight compartments. The second aspect is that what I mentioned is that we need to re-examine how much of overlap there is in the roles of the services versus the paramilitary. As somebody did tweak in a chat to say that what about the Coast Guards and others? Yes, they're all part of paramilitary in a way, because they are not the three traditional services. This is no disrespect meant for anybody. The ITBP showed what the army couldn't do in the Kailash ranges. So therefore, there is always room for them to exhibit some of their strengths. What I was trying to say is that we need to take stock of it. And we don't have, just because we are a manpower heavy country, we shouldn't have two people standing at the same place where one guy can stand. And that's where, and I go back to the point that Kaushish Saab made about General Malik's decision to reduce manpower by 50,000. I remember him mentioning it to me during Kargil days, that all we are doing is that the people who are going home, we are sending home about 50,000 people. So we are not looking at suddenly employing 50,000 in their lieu and gradually trying to see where this can be spread out in such a way that our overall strength decreases by 50,000 or a lakh. But situation changed after that, and the rest is, as we know, history. But I will go to Captain Anubha now. And some of your issues have been addressed, ma'am. Some of the issues that you have raised require a much larger debate, such as the role of women in forward areas. But you did talk about logistics. You did talk about the need to actually revisit some of the areas, such as how can we continue to have the minimum requirement of equipment so that they were not faced with a Kargil-like situation. Your views. Mute, unmute.
Yes, I'd been listening to all of you very keenly, and a lot of knowledge and a lot of, I've gathered many, you can say, insight about everything. I think I would be out of the line if I say, but there are two questions I would like to ask all of you present here. That I heard that, everybody was discussing that the politicians do not know what the military is doing and military does not know what the politicians are doing and vice versa. So, and also about cutting of the cost for having more people in the army so that we have better budget and we have to pay less. So how about politicians who are already politicians joining army or territorial army for a while to know that, how the other side feels. Also, another thing, like Maruf sir, you said that the logistics about, getting the lady officers in the army. So you tell me one thing, when we invite people or guests over a meal, what do? Obviously, we prepare the meal first and then invite people. Or do we do like this, that we invite the people and tell them to stand by the door till the time we are preparing the meal? So that is how, if the logistics are to be there, what was the hurry to announce that the women officers have to be inducted? If one should have done the homework. I'm not saying that it was not a good step. Now the things have gone so far very well. The women are given their due and place and things are happening. But every time saying that the logistics were not there, that is why this happened, I don't really like the sound of it. And yes, I think after Kargil, it was kind of wake-up call for the army to discuss so many things at so many platforms, like I've been just listening to all of you. Things have changed. Yes, we have moved towards Atmanirbhar Bharat, and so many things are happening. So I'm sure that this gap between the procurement and the requirement has become narrow. But still, if you talk about and I would really like to congratulate Commodore Singh sir, that yes, the Navy always takes the lead and has been an inspiration to rest of us to keep fighting and keep, holding the fort. Things are looking very bright to me, of course, all of us, where I'm speaking on behalf of all the lady officers, that things are looking really bright. But whatever so far we were discussing, I'm really getting into kind of, you can say that I'm feeling really concerned that how things will, because we still seem to be at discussion level. I don't know if something is happening on the ground. We've been discussing about everything about the armed forces, this is how it should happen. But I hope that things are happening on the ground. I do see certain differences, but I hope sooner they are bridged, the better it would be. I think apart from this, I can't put comment much. It is all up to you people to discuss and decide. But thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak and put across my points.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you for your points. I'd just like to respond briefly. You had mentioned that, if the logistics weren't in place, why were women put into the service? I think, you see, often politicians make announcements which then they tie themselves up in knots and then impose it on the services that you implement it any which way. I don't think, just like the Agniveer and Agnipath, there was much engagement with the commanding officer level of people. And this was just decided that some people, after some thought and deliberation, but only in the corridors of South Block, put up the proposal. It seemed like a good idea. It was announced. And therefore, even after it was announced and the public uproar that took place, they kept making changes. The same situation they had got themselves in, but it didn't lead to, for example, I thought it was completely bizarre to offer women 14 years of regular commission and not 20 years, just like 4 years for Agnipath, because there are, I still haven't seen the logic of that 14-year argument. It could have been 10 years or 20 years or whatever. So what happens is that the file passes down the line to somebody in MOD, the service headquarters, and some colonel Saab suddenly comes up with a brainwave, and that is the proposal that goes up. And people have so many other things on their plate, and they keep saying yes, 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 till it becomes somebody is able to identify a weak spot, and then it becomes an embarrassment. And then the politicians look at the military, and the military scuttled around trying to save their skin. It is nobody's, it doesn't require rocket science to know that a lot of people who get promoted to the highest levels of military, they are not necessarily the best guys to have gone up. And therefore, they've all been very good at as post officers, by pushing files up and pushing files down. There are very few decision makers. So there's a problem there that needed to be addressed a bit more. And it was not with disrespect to ladies. It was just, there was a logistics issue. And therefore, subsequently, there have been comments that have come out by people like General Pattaraman and various others who turned around and said, let's do it in phases, just like the Air Force is now saying that theaterization should be done in phases. But now I'm going to open it up to questions from outside, because we have half an hour left. And I think we've got everyone's views. I'm skipping Commodore Jai Singh, because I'm sure a lot of questions will come to him from those who are listening in. He, as it is, gave a very detailed assessment on various issues. So we'll go to questions now. Somebody has sent me a message to say, I seek your indulgence to respond to the point you made about training at DAU. What is DAU? I'm unaware. Kaushish Saab, you want to say something? You're mute.
Yeah, that was me, Sandeep. DAU is Defense Acquisition University. Okay. So very quick points. You mentioned about lack of training. I entirely agree with you that people are not perhaps very well trained. But I don't know if DAU is the answer. I mean, about 4 or 5 years back, when I was still associated with IDSA, we had discussions with DAU. The kind of courses which they offer are, maybe 70-80% of what they teach there is not relevant to us. I mean, how the acquisitions are processed in the United States, and what role the Senate plays, etc., etc. That's not really relevant. But we in collaboration with them, we were able to come up with a customized course which they were to run in India. And that suggestion did go to the ministry, but I don't know what happened thereafter. Nothing came out of it. Insofar as, this problem of people not being able to contribute to acquisition because of their lack of experience or, various other reasons. Actually, again, going back a couple of years, when Mr. Parikar was the defense minister, he had set up a committee, if you remember. And that committee did recommend the creation of a bespoke defense capability acquisition organization, which was to be akin to, but not similar to the DGA of France and so on. And the idea was that, because people lack experience, they need to be trained. You need to coordinate research and development activities, production activity. You need to reach out to the industry, et cetera, et cetera. So everything has to be done by an organization which functions at an arm's length from the ministry, is not affected by the bureaucratic way of functioning and so on, and which is manned by people who are qualified to man those posts. So a very detailed report was given. Again, nothing came out of it. So we need to also, go back and see what efforts were made to address these problems. I mean, there's no need to actually reinvent the wheel every time. That's
very, very, very true, sir. Very true. I think, you see, I don't think I was suggesting a defense acquisition university. The problem is that you have a university, then you have to have a full syllabus that runs through the year. And then you try and squeeze in a lot of courses which look in the domain area, but obviously are not directly relevant to us. So
sorry for interrupting you. That was not the suggestion. The suggestion was that at the IDSA, you run a few courses.
Exactly, sir. That's the point I'm making. Yeah. I'm saying that when somebody says, set up a university for defense acquisition, I mean, it's bizarre. You can't have a full this thing. What you can do is a midway point is to start with. We keep sending our service officers for courses here and there. Some of there, as Manvinder would agree, have been done, and Commodore Jai Singh will also, as a matter of tradition and habit. So there is a naval officer who will go to some course in the UK or US. You have military officers who go for courses which we have traditionally sent. For example, I mean, yes, it's a reward for topping the staff college exam that you go to Camberley and now Shrivenham. But how many, except with the exception of the current army chief, how many military officers who've gone to Camberley or Shrivenham have risen to be chief? So what you are learning there, that maybe you should be used when you come back, and not post him as a BM of a frontline brigade or a Jeevan Ops of a frontline brigade, but you send him back to staff college to help alter our syllabus so that others learn from what is being taught there and he brings a repository of knowledge. Likewise, we need to identify officers from all the services who can, over a staggered period of time, be sent for defense acquisition courses abroad and come back and create this capsule of programs that can be delivered under the umbrella of IDSA, USI, or whatever on defense acquisition. So therefore, this becomes a sought after course, which comes out with people who are trained there. You don't need to go to a CAT A establishment, which is headed by a 3-star officer, to only do a course. You can do a course even in an organization run by St. George or USI or IDSA, but you bring value on the table. That's what is not happening. You have to do aside with a lot of irrelevant courses that you are going and doing abroad, which have no relevance to us. Lekin 50 साल से लोग कैम्बरले जा रहे हैं तो उनको भेजते रहो. That's the point I'm trying to make. If money is an issue. Now, the other point that I want to throw up is for Commodore Jai Singh. There is a question that is doing the round. What is the hurdle after the TOT of 2 diesel-electric submarines from different countries? Why have we not been able to come up with our own design and machinery to build it ourselves? Project 75I is still far from reality. I read a piece recently in the Economic Times by Seema Siroi. I love the wisdom she brings from Washington. And she said that the US is now engaging with France so that US can help France provide us the nuclear submarines, just like they've done with Australia and UK with the AUKUS programs. What is your awareness of that? What would be, because I had argued when AUKUS happened in a TV debate that India should go with France and go ahead and get nuclear submarines. You know, if we are being sidelined despite all this drum beating about Quad, we need nuclear submarines. So instead of our own programs, why not going for 1 or 2 nuclear submarines? French have the experience of nuclear submarines, though I believe the French submarines are very loud. They're not as silent as the others. You are a submariner, please educate us. Mute.
Yeah, sorry, 2 aspects to this. One, of course, is as far as the nuclear submarine thing goes. You know, as far as AUKUS is concerned, I think it's a good thing that happens for India because we need more submarine presence in the Indian Ocean of submarines friendly to us to counter a growing challenge. So I have no problems with the AUKUS program in terms of US and UK providing support to Australia and nuclear submarine program. But nuclear submarines are very complex platforms. So it's not easy to sort of just shift gear and say, okay, we went to the Russians for 20 years, developed a nuclear submarine program with them, and now we'll go with the French. The technology of the reactors is different. The operating principles are different of the submarines. So we've got to decide which way are we going. If we are going for an SSN program, who are we going to partner with? I know most of it is going to be so-called indigenous, but we need a partner. Secondly, the French, their nuclear submarine experience is restricted to 2 types of submarines. One are the SSBNs, and the other was what they call the Rubis class. Now, the Rubis class was only a 3,000-ton submarine. It wasn't meant for cross-ocean operations. It was more of a transition from conventional submarine technology to nuclear submarine technology. So it's only now when they've come up with their Sufron class, which is a slightly bigger boat, which meets the sort of operational requirement that we would look for in an SSN in a blue water space like the Indian Ocean or beyond in the Indo-Pacific. So that is one aspect of it. Whether we are going to go with the French or not, I think is not so much about will not depend so much on the technology on offer. It will depend more on our sort of strategic equation, government to government, with which country. And how far are we going to continue with Russia in light of what's happening? So these are all questions, I think, which still are unanswered. You are aware that we returned the Chakra. The second Chakra went back last year. We have an ongoing program to get a third SSN on lease by 2025, for which I think the initial contract has already been signed a couple of years ago from the Russians, which is supposed to come in 2025. Now, whether that is happening, not happening, I suppose it will happen if we've already paid a certain amount of money for it. So I'm not really sure where the SSN program, whom we should collaborate with. But yes, we have to quickly get onto our SSN, indigenous SSN program, because nuclear submarines are not something that anyone is going to part with that kind of technology willingly. They will give us black boxes and say, okay, just install all this here and here's your nuclear submarine. But if we've got to become a nuclear submarine, if we have to develop a nuclear submarine capability, we have to do it ourselves with whosoever might help us in that. And unfortunately, after that 2015 CCS approval, where a certain amount of money was sanctioned to carry out a preliminary design study, and which was successfully completed in 2020 or early 2021, it was expected that very soon the CCS would approve the 6 SSNs, which had been spoken about. Unfortunately, a year and a half later, that program still lies in limbo. Now, an SSN development, even navies which have been operating submarines for the last 50 or 60 years, take 10 to 15 years before they can operationalize a new class of submarine. The Brits are still struggling with the Astute class. The Americans struggle with the Virginia class. The Russians are struggling with their own class. Not struggling, but it takes that much time for a design to mature and become operationally available. If we have to start doing our own thing from scratch, and let's not compare the Arihant and say, oh, we build the Arihant so we can build an SSN. They're two, except for nuclear propulsion, there's a lot of difference between the 2 types of submarines for the kind of role they have to do and the kind of capability they bring to the table. So we will not take less than 15 to 20 years before our first SSN can be said to be fully combat capable. Now, if we're looking at that, we're already in 2040. So the sooner we get going on it, the better it is. I know it's an expensive program, but India has to make this call, and I'd like to agree with what Mr. Manvinder Singh said about the third aircraft carrier and the submarine program. I've been writing about this. India has to make this choice. Where do we want to be 15 years from now? Do we want to be a major maritime power in the Indian Ocean, the preeminent power? And like I said, to influence the outcomes and not get influenced by them, we've got to make that call. And we have to make that call now. We cannot get these sophisticated platforms for power projection and blue water capability off the shelf. Nobody's going to give them to us. So I think that is the call we have to take. As far as the as far as the conventional program goes, yeah, it is. We've not been able to keep. The program has fallen short of expectations. So now we are all relying on the 75I to happen in terms of providing that transfer of technology. The government has laid down very stringent indigenization parameters. How soon and how well will we be able to get going on this is again going to be a matter of negotiation and discussion over the next couple of years. But if all works out well, I think in another couple of years, the 75I should be a reality. The building, not the boat. The boat won't happen for another 8 to 10 years.
Okay, now, thanks. Obviously, your awareness of submarine and submarine technologies all over the world far exceeds capabilities of at least lesser mortals like me. But what I want you to explain a bit more, this was based on a question you had asked me 2 days ago at a seminar at MIT University, where, Indo-Pacific as a term has come to be because the Americans coined it. From the Pacific Command, they made it Pacific and India Command, Indian Ocean Command, so they made it Indo-Pacific. And America is really everywhere in terms of maritime capabilities with 11 aircraft carrier groups and various others. I mean, even the Chinese, even though they are expanding at breathtaking pace, both in terms of real punch capabilities that America has and in terms of the ability to really strategically influence a maritime decision, Chinese are nowhere near the Americans, at least for now. The second thing is that our own capabilities. I have been greatly influenced for 30 years by a book by Paul Kennedy, which talks about the rise and fall of great powers. And I've been always very cautious about not indulging in strategic overstretch. And I think we are getting dragged into strategic overstretch if we are going to look at our Navy getting involved beyond the Straits of Malacca on our east and beyond the coast of Africa on our west. So if we were to be realistic and stick to this large template, and this is no small template by any means, we have a strategic location because nature has bestowed this on us. And that's where we are central to a lot of things in the Indian Ocean region. What is it, the need for us to get involved beyond this area that I'm defining? Do we have the funds? Do we have the capacity? And how does it address our security concerns? Or is it because we are happy to be America's lackey in those areas?
Personally, Maruf, if you ask me, I agree entirely with you. I don't think the Navy has either the resources or the capability at the moment to be operating much beyond the Indian Ocean. If we can, of course, our own strategy and doctrine very clearly articulates the Indian Ocean as our primary area of interest. We haven't extended that primary area of interest to the Pacific or the Red Sea, which we continue to regard as a secondary areas of interest, which I would interpret to mean that primary area of interest means we must retain a favorable maritime advantage in the Indian Ocean at all times, irrespective of the sort of opposition we face. A secondary would be where we do not allow ourselves to be influenced by what is happening over there. We are able to hold our own in our primary area of interest and do whatever necessary to so that that is that we are developing with navies, the 40 odd navies that we are exercising with, including these more sort of deeper strategic interaction with Pacific navies, including the 2+2s and exercises. I think this augurs well for us in terms of being able to not having to actively be present there in ensuring that our own interest in the Indian Ocean is not compromised. They would do that for us in the Pacific, hopefully. They would be a counter to China. They would be able to contain, let's say, a future PLA Navy, the extent of the PLA Navy's operation in the Indian Ocean. Similarly, in the West, what I think we have to concern ourselves is to develop the capability to hold our own in the Indian Ocean against a PLA Navy that is far more powerful, that will be far more powerful a decade from now than it is today in the Indian Ocean, with its support from the Pakistan Navy. It's arming the Pakistan Navy with 8 submarines and 4 destroyers. Now, why would the Pakistan Navy, with a small little coastline, require 8 plus the 3 submarines. They have 11 submarines. Obviously, this is to put pressure on India or contain India or whatever word we might like to use for it. And besides giving China a foothold in these ports with support and repair facilities for their submarines to operate. So I think you're right. We need to build up our capacity and capability to be able to always maintain a favorable maritime situation for ourselves in the Indian Ocean and be able to protect our interests. The most important thing, I think, is our energy security. If the Chinese tomorrow are a big presence in West Asia, with a base in Djibouti, a base in Gwadar, they can seriously compromise the movement of our tankers coming out of the Hormuz. We'll have to then redirect our tankers through a longer route, provide constant security cover to them. And that is where the importance of an SSN comes in. If you have SSN capability, you can check the movement of carrier battle groups of your adversary by just letting him know that you have an SSN presence in the area.
Okay. So yeah, we're running tight on time, and I'd like to finish by 2:00. I go back with a question, which is an interesting question that's come from Kerala. Kerala Media Academy in Kochi, Syed MS. Maninder Singh ji, this is regarding the situation in Ukraine. I think what he's trying to allude to is that the strategy adopted by Ukraine in the conflict with Russia, what bearing should it have on our modernization process? I think what he's trying to suggest is that, do you only think technology can be a winner in conflicts, or as Ukraine has shown, that it's a combination, and I've written about it, that it's a combination of the staying power of a nation, the will of the people who refuse to be defeated, and of course, it will be an exaggeration to say that Ukraine has done it all on its own. Quite clearly, the Americans and the Europeans have been beefing up the Ukrainians with everything in play to try and exhaust Russia like they did Russia in the Cold War, but this time with a hot war. Mute.
Sorry. I think the circumstances of a Ukraine-Russia conflict are very different from virtually any conflict that India is likely to be involved in. We can't do it, likely to be involved in. And the analogy also doesn't stand, because in this short period of time, Ukraine has been the beneficiary of roughly $65 billion worth of military aid, and hundreds of mercenary fighters, maybe thousands of mercenary fighters. I'm not sure. I don't see India being a beneficiary of any such aid in the short term or in the long run by any country. India doesn't have an ally of that nature, and it's not going to have an ally of that nature. And also the input of manpower. The Ukraine-Russia conflict is unique to their history, their sociology, their conflict between two churches. I mean, there are various ways of looking at Ukraine-Russia, and I don't think I don't think any of the Indian scenarios would fit in.
Okay.
I really,
I mean, yes, the only thing I feel is the lesson to take away from Ukraine is that we should not constantly just hanker for high-end technology, because the ability of people to stick it out on the ground and fight with whatever comes for their use.
Yeah, I mean, if to use that, use that example. I mean, I'll give you my understanding of the Mountain Corps, which became so hyped that, Mountain Corps for China, Mountain Corps for China. You look at the number of Assam Rifle battalions that you have, and having seen them in operations, I mean, they are some of the best run military units anywhere in the world. You use that Assam Rifle manpower to do your, northeast plugging. The Chinese can get nowhere.
You're right.
It's just rationalization of manpower.
No, I completely agree with you. It's a brilliant thought, because historically, it was the Assam Rifle before the 62 conflict that
Friends of the
was
Hill
involved
people.
even in Ladakh. What was Assamese units doing in Ladakh? Or they were the one that welcomed the Dalai Lama when he arrived in on 30th March 1959. So I'm completely with you. Instead of, you see, the problem in restructuring is you have to learn to reorganize and dispense with what has been there. You can't say, I will keep this, but I need another new organization and another new structure. And it's not restructuring, you're just recreating new and new things. Anyway, I go to my last question, which is by Colonel Baljinder Singh, who is USIS PF. I don't know what that stands for. But in any case, he has said that, in this Atmanirbhar initiative, why is it that we are wanting to suddenly manufacture everything on our own? We don't have the defense industrial complex of the scale that can meet the targets being set out for them for manufacture and export. Why isn't there the possibility of OEMs engaging in joint production of technology? And I'm not talking a joint production like the Tatra vehicle, which after 40 years was still left-hand drive. And all they did was got them from Czechoslovakia and put wheels out here and they said assembled in India. But I'm talking of something more serious. So I'd like a bit from you and a bit from Amit sir, and we'll wind up.
Okay, quick. The shocking fact of India's R&D is that the DRDO precedes America's DARPA by 6 months or 8 months. And you look at the trajectory of DARPA, what they have created in terms of the air assets, the land assets, the sea assets, and look what we have created or not created. And then you have this huge network of ordnance factories, you have a huge network of TPSUs. The base was there. It is just that, you didn't have a well thought out strategy of what you wanted and what you needed for the long run and, for the short, medium, long. And now I think it's too late to start reinventing the wheel all over again. There are things where you should just have a joint venture. And I'm, like this silly decision to throw out the INSAS rifle. It's the most basic, most important weapon is your basic rifle. Don't throw it out. You made it. Just get into get a good partner. I mean, I know some Italian or some other foreign companies are interested in being partnering and improving the rifle. Just improve it instead of buying 70,000 off the shelf, which are not functional. And you waste money and you waste time and you are left with nothing. Your logistics go for a toss and your preparations go for a toss. So I agree with him, with the colonel who says that, have a good partnership system, but that comes from confidence in your decision making instead of shifting goalposts. And, as Mr. Kaushik said, you can't keep shifting GSQR, requirements all the time.
Kaushik sir, your last thoughts before we begin to wind up?
Yeah, I would agree with the observation that was made, but I'll add just two things to it. One, that the problem is that we don't have a cut and dried policy on Atmanirbhar Bharat in defense. It's actually admitted by the MOD and it's there in the standing committee reports that there is no such thing as, self-reliance policy for defense. There are disjointed statements and, procedures which have been laid down, which put together would mean that, we are pursuing some kind of goal in self-reliance. So that's one problem. The second problem is that, it's not a problem, but the fact is that while there is a lot of emphasis on buy IDDM, buy Indian and so on, but to be fair to the system, there is also, there are categories like buy and make Indian and buy global manufacture in India, which do permit the creation of joint ventures and acquisition of technology, etc. In fact, even in buy IDDM, there is a possibility of an Indian company participating in the tender with a product which has been made in India, not with indigenous design, but with the technology transfer from the foreign companies. But the problem is the confusion at the policy level. I mean, DPP, for example, which was all many people called it defense procurement policy. It was never a policy. It was a procedure. And so we intermix policy with procedure with the disastrous results. So we need to be aware of what we are doing and what we can do and then build a policy around that, which I think is something which we have not been able to do.
Very correct, sir. And my last request is to Captain Anubha. Any last thoughts, ma'am, before we wind up?
I think we are heading towards a very bright and hopeful future once the discussion and thought process has started towards the right direction. I'm sure the day is not far when we would be doing pretty well ourselves, and Atmanirbhar Bharat zarur banega.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank all the participants for their brilliant insights. I think we've learned a lot. I have in particular have gained a lot, and some terminology issues, some conceptual issues, and some challenges that lie ahead. These have been brought out. I hand it back now to Mr. Puru Singh to now take charge of the events. We've wrapped up exactly in 2 hours. That's what you wanted. And I promised you in the beginning that I'm pretty good at, this is one thing I claim to be good at, is running conferences and others and keeping it to time and making sure that everyone gets to say their bit. So now back to Puru Singh. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you everyone for a wonderful and a fruitful discussion. First, all the panelists, Amrinder Singh ji, Shamit Koshish, Sumaruf Raza, Mr. Commodore Anil Singh, and Ms. Captain Anubha Rathod for your insights and well-put discussion on the defense modernization in India. This was the third virtual workshops, and thank you participants for joining in the third virtual workshop. We have 2 more coming in the next 2 months. So keep joining us, and thank you everyone once again from the bottom of my heart. Have a wonderful day. Jai Hind.